Stop killing Hazaras! Stop killing Hazaras! Stop killing Hazaras! Stop killing Hazaras! Stop killing Hazaras!
Hazaras all over the world have been persecuted for so many years, especially in Pakistan lately. We've had many Hazaras are being killed and men slaughtered mercilessly. But unfortunately, the Pakistan government has been very quiet and silent in regards to all the target killing that has happened. It's no longer target killing, it's a genocide. This needs to stop, and we need to condemn this target killing of Shia. It has happened many times during the last year. It has happened in the same city again, against the same Shia Hazara community again. Where is the UN? Where is the Human Rights Watch? Where is the Pakistan government to raise their voice and to bring some changes, to bring peace to our people? Australia is very concerned about the number of arrivals to Australia, and if they really want to decrease the number, they really need to put pressure on Pakistan government about the basic human rights of Hazaras. They need to put pressure on Pakistan government to provide safety and security for those people so they do not flee constantly to other countries like Australia.
Stop killing Shia! Stop killing Shia! Stop killing Shia! Stop killing Shia!
Is that the Australian government is complicit with the Pakistani government and the outrages that are going on in places like Quetta, because we know that Australian money is funding the measures that are trapping Hazara people in Pakistan and preventing them escaping danger, all because the Australian government is so desperate to avoid them coming here in order to make claims on our protection. Australia should welcome Hazara refugees as it should welcome all others. We should process them when they arrive here on asylum boats in the community. We should give them the support they need to live decently while we're assessing their refugee application, and we should promptly give them the support and the care they desperately need.
Close Now Road, close Manus Island, close Villawood, process Hazara refugee application here in the community, give people the protection they need.
And I feel like it's still likely that it may be delayed. I don't know. I just feel like they're behind where they should be with the game, and it won't meet an exact standard of where we want it to be and give the game true justice, because people have been waiting for this game a long time. It's been a long time since the last Star Wars Battlefront game was out. So gamers and Star Wars fans expect nothing less than damn near perfection. You know, obviously no game is absolutely perfect, but after such a long hiatus, people expect it to be top notch. And like I said, so I think it might be delayed. I think if it's delayed, nobody should be upset about that. You know, that should be welcomed. If they need more time to polish it, that should be given to them. We know it's being worked on by DICE, so I'm
Hands off WikiLeaks! Hands off WikiLeaks! Hands off WikiLeaks! Hands off WikiLeaks!
Americans are maced in their faces for asking questions like, why is my community poverty-stricken, yet corporations are making billions of dollars out of that poverty? I'm almost finished. The criminalisation of truth is a weapon of all those whose corruption maintains their power. The coward media in this country must ask themselves whether turning a blind eye to true journalism or to a true journalist's possible incarcerations for exposing the truth is an attack on them all or not. The ones who answer no are simply the servants of this criminal capitalist dictatorship. We must always remember that Bradley Manning is still behind bars while we are free. WikiLeaks, Manning and Assange, continue your fight. The MUA Sydney branch will be with you all the way.
Thank you, Paul. Fantastic. Our next speaker is Fred Fuentes. Fred is a co-convener of the Latin American Social Forum here in Sydney and a supporter of WikiLeaks and Assange. And perhaps, you know, he might, as many people have said to me today, remind us all that we could be writing to President Correa of Ecuador to urge him to favourably consider Julian Assange's application for asylum. Thank you, Fred.
Well, like many of you, when we woke up that morning to hear the news that Julian Assange had sought asylum in the Ecuador embassy, we as a Latin America Social Forum, a coalition of Latin American community groups and solidarity activists from countries such as Chile, Uruguay, Venezuela, El Salvador, Nicaragua, we knew we had to respond immediately, and there was two reasons for that. The first was because we have no doubt that Julian Assange's life is in danger. We know that we can expect nothing of this current Australian government to defend his rights. They were rushing over themselves to accuse him of being guilty. They didn't know what he was guilty of, they just knew he was already guilty. The federal police had to then tell him that actually he had committed no crime. But yet the persecution of Julian Assange by the Australian government continues. Julian knew that, and he knew he had to find asylum somewhere else. We are also absolutely 100% sure that he will get no help from the US government. As Latin American solidarity activists, we know of the long history of attempts to silence, assassinate, kill individuals and entire peoples that have tried to rise up against US imperialism, against the role of the US in Latin America. Military dictatorships that have come on the backs of tens of thousands of people being killed, all of them funded by the US. Why on earth wouldn't they want to get Assange? And I think Rafael Correa, in his interview with Julian Assange, summed it up very nicely as to why the US hates Assange so much. Because he raised an old story that has been mentioned by other Latin American presidents, and they've asked the question, well, why is it that a military coup has never happened in the US? And the simple answer is because there's no US embassy in Washington. Well, when you reveal the truths of what the US embassies are doing in Latin America and all over the world, you can rest assured the US government will come for you. But we also knew as well that we have no faith in the Swedish government to do anything. And we have a very specific case study of why we do not trust the Swedish government in any way to protect the rights of Julian Assange. And I tell a story of a journalist, Joaquin Perez Becerra. He was a journalist in Colombia. He lived in Colombia. He was elected councillor of a left-wing group called the Patriotic Union. Because of the threat that this party represented, 4,000 of their members were killed. He went to exile. He picked Sweden as his country of exile. He has lived there for the last 20 years. He has his family there. He is a Swedish citizen. Today, this journalist is in a Colombian jail, and the Swedish government is doing nothing to protect this journalist, a journalist that had to flee from Colombia and is now facing supposed charges of terrorism. What is the Swedish government doing for its own citizen? Nothing. What can we expect them to do for Julian Assange? Much less. But we also knew we had to respond not just to defend Assange, but to defend Ecuador. Because we knew immediately, as soon as he was in the Ecuadorian embassy, that they would also use this to attack Ecuador, as they have already been doing for a number of years. And so it began in the media. The Ecuadorian government. Why would Assange pick the Ecuadorian government, which apparently has one of the worst records in regards to freedom of speech? Well, we really know when the corporate media speaks about freedom of speech, what they're really talking about is their ability to control what is able to be said and not heard. And the Ecuadorian government has very much been leading the way in breaking down this corporate power. When Correa came to power, 6 of the major 8 newspapers were owned by banking corporations. Now you can imagine there might be a slight conflict of interest that occurs when you both own a bank and a newspaper in the current global economic crisis, but also the banking crisis that happened in Ecuador in the 90s. What did the newspapers do there? They reported nothing about the banking crisis. They in fact signed a deal, which was revealed by WikiLeaks because of the US embassy cables, where these banking corporations and newspapers sat down and said, we will not report any of this because that way none of our interests are touched. Well, the Ecuadorian government and its people have drafted up a new constitution. In that constitution, if you're a banker, you are no longer allowed to own any media outlets. That's a pretty important start, I think, for breaking down the corporate power over the media. But that wasn't enough, because a few years later, they held another referendum to further amend the Constitution. And now the Constitution reads that anyone who is involved in the media industry are not allowed to have any other business interests anywhere else. Because of course, once you do start to have other business interests, maybe someone like Gina Reinhart, this is obviously going to become an issue when you begin to report on that. Yep. So I think there's a very clear reason of why they want to get Assange. I think there's a very clear reason of why they're going to attack Ecuador. And I think that's why it's so important that we are here today, both to support Assange, but I do urge people to also show the support with the Ecuadorian government. Let's show them that millions of people around the world are willing to support them if they take the defiant stand of basically saying to the US, we don't care, we are going to defend Assange, we are going to give him asylum. We know we need to do that, we need to continue to do that, but I think we need to do one more thing as well. We need to take the lessons of governments like Ecuador and of other people around the world and use that information that WikiLeaks has made available to us to really begin to fight for real change. Because that information is only powerful when people like ourselves take that into our hands and make use of that information in order to fight for a better world. So I think that's why I want to finish off by congratulating the organisers today and congratulate everyone that's here. And let's hope that we can continue to build that campaign to defend Assange, to defend Ecuador, and to fight for that better world we all want to see.
Thank you, Fred. Now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Irene Doubtney, Greens Councillor for the City of Sydney.
I pay my respects to the elders past and present and acknowledge that this is Aboriginal land, always was and always will be. This is also the homeland of Julian Assange, and it is reprehensible that the Australian government ignores its obligations to protect and support one of its own citizens in his time of need. Rather than defend our citizens, we are opening our borders, our Northern Territory, to American troops and proving that we are truly a client state rather than an independent nation. As a client state, we are too cowardly to take an independent stance on protecting Julian Assange. The government is too busy towing the American line. But we have seen that no country wants to take the risk of upsetting the United States in its vendetta against WikiLeaks and its founder, Julian Assange. We know that he currently sits in the Ecuadorian embassy awaiting a decision that will only give him a temporary reprieve and could see him end up in a country where his safety will be far from guaranteed. However, it is highly unlikely that Assange will ever be able to leave the embassy without being arrested the moment he sets foot on British soil. How he can even get to the airport without being arrested is a matter for speculation. And it is highly unlikely that this will be more than a temporary reprieve in the ongoing extradition battle. The publishing of the Iraq and Afghanistan war diaries and the trench of diplomatic cables showed the true nature of government and the power it wields on the global stage. The war diaries, particularly the film of the heartless murder of an Iraqi journalist, his cameraman, and countless innocent civilians, shocked the world and exposed the great disconnect between the American use of power and the fate of innocent Iraqi citizens and citizens around the world. The growing use of remotely controlled weaponry, the use of central command stations has dehumanised and desensitised military operations to the extent where it's just another video game. This is particularly true where drones are concerned, which are becoming rapidly the new face of government power, whether it's civil or military. WikiLeaks showed the true face of power, and its continuing release of cables and documents highlighted the dysfunctional nature of power relations across the world. By exposing these cables and documents, WikiLeaks gave power to ordinary people to see government for what it really is. For most people who saw the video or read the cables, the truth highlighted the real David and Goliath nature of the US war machine versus the ordinary people of the world. This is the real crime that Julian Assange faces. It's not really about dubious rape claims and murky political manoeuvrings in Sweden. It is about the crime of exposing the nature of the state in all its cruelty, pettiness and ridiculous posturing. Now that we have seen the workings of government, we can never go back to the innocence of the pre-WikiLeaks days. We have a duty to protect WikiLeaks and Julian Assange from the heavy boot of power and the neoliberal system it supports. The blockade of WikiLeaks by the likes of Visa, MasterCard and PayPal showed the way big business and the state work together against anyone who dares to expose in a critical manner the Machiavellian nature of power. Last time I spoke, I referred to the importance of truth-telling and how our governments hide the truth and feed people thought bubbles and doublespeak. Our war reporters are embedded with the coalition's troops in Afghanistan, and rarely do we see any real analysis in the mainstream media, which was so beautifully pointed out by Jake Lynch earlier. It's all patriotism and flag waving, but little understanding of what is really happening on the ground. We rightly mourn our fallen soldiers, but how little space is given to the suffering of the fallen people of Afghanistan. Rarely do we see stories about how the behaviour of the coalition's troops and the dreaded arbitrariness of drones are feeding the ranks of the Taliban. We need an independent press to give people a picture of the real world and the machinations of government. We need an organisation like WikiLeaks to keep us informed as they have done in the past. In a world where the Olympic Games, once a celebration of peace, have been hijacked by this siege mentality, with batteries of rockets on apartment buildings, 36,000 troops to keep the peace, and drones circling overhead. We realise that the dystopian future that has been predicted by so much science fiction is with us now. It is a world at a tipping point in every way, and it is essential that organisations like WikiLeaks are able to operate and release information that has always been hidden from regular people like us. It is a world where people are saying enough is enough, and movements like Occupy Wall Street and Anonymous are standing up against the establishment. It is a world that needs its WikiLeaks. The Greens have stood behind this movement, and we will continue to call for the Australian government to support Julian and in his precarious position as it stands at the moment. Free Bradley Manning, support Julian, and let's keep WikiLeaks keeping the bastards honest. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. And the Greens have been incredible supporters of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, particularly Senator Scott Ludlam and Irene and many other politicians.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for coming. WikiLeaks is a gift to history. We have now, for the first time, the ability to write history, not only through the eyes of the victors. WikiLeaks has become a leveller between people and government. It has ushered in an age where we, the people, have access to information once deemed for their eyes only. For years, Australia has wantonly participated in brutal, unnecessary wars in the name of freedom and democracy, as excessive governments can't seem to say no to the US. Thanks to the courageous work of WikiLeaks, we have an in-depth resource enabling us to put these wars into perspective and make informed decisions as to whether we, the Australian people, think our involvement is wise and in our national interest. Both in the Afghan and Iraq war releases to tell a different story than our government and the MSN would have us believe. It is becoming more apparent that the government's idea of national interest is in conflict with our own. We have learned that the dire situation that people seeking asylum go through, and it suits certain members in our parliament. WikiLeaks' US Embassy cables revealed the truth in the agenda behind Stop the Boats. We know that a 5-country cartel of Australia, US, Canada, South Africa and Switzerland have joined forces to promote mining interests at the expense of Indigenous people and their land. We have learned from the Stratfor email release that our government is just a bit too chummy with the US, and which ministers were communicating with the US in a manner some would regard as treason and or spying. We learned the once faceless men of the Labor Party felt Gillard would be more pragmatic as a Prime Minister than Rudd. We learned that our government was happy to serve Julian Assange to the US regardless of his innocence or his Australian citizenship. We have learned, and this cannot be disputed, that our government is sycophantic in the extreme towards the US, and we are hardly more than a client state, with the government lacking the maturity to think for themselves, regardless what Australian people want. We have only recently started to see the latest WikiLeaks release, the Syria files. The release not only allows us to see the machinations of big business and governments regarding Syria, but it, like previous releases, is a remarkable resource for education and training. These things are a gift to history from WikiLeaks. We here today are in the eye of the storm in history. Australia should be proud of WikiLeaks and its editor-in-chief, Julian Assange, in the fight not only for freedom of speech, but freedom generally. We need to give backing to WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. Our government has tried ignoring us. We have written, called, emailed our MPs and senators, often having to inform them of the irregularities of the case. We have used resources like justiceforassange.com to get facts out. We have grown in numbers, and it's our numbers that dictate how long they will ignore us. We must continue to talk to others and inform them. Take to the streets as we have today, ad nauseum. You can sign up to the mailing list for Support Assange and WikiLeaks Coalition. The mailing list will keep you abreast of actions. All the info you need is on the flyers that have been circulating. Our government must know we are not willing to lose such an important Australian to their career whims. You can help by purchasing the WikiLeaks CD or donating at WikiLeaks Beat the Blockade site. There is also an array of quality merchandising from wikileaks.org, or you can throw some coins in the buckets here today or purchase a badge. It is an expensive business fighting bogus charges, an unfair financial blockade, and manage the most prolific media outlet the world has ever seen. Now, although there has been a win in Iceland regarding the visa blockade, visa will be appealing. So keep WikiLeaks and Julian Assange in your hearts. Help them, help us to leave a free world for the future. Last month, Senator Ludlam moved that the prejudicial statements made by senior government members be retracted with the backing of the coalition. I asked Senator Ludlam on Twitter, is there a time frame for Gillard et al. To retract the prejudicial statements regarding Julian Assange and WikiLeaks? He replied, well, I think their time frame is never. So your homework, we can start writing, telling MPs, and the Prime Minister particularly, Attorneys General, both Roxon and McClelland, and our Foreign Minister, to honour this motion and demand they protect Julian Assange. If history is indeed written by the victors, this is a battle we cannot afford to lose. Let truth be victorious. And now I'd like to introduce Dennis Aubrey with a song he's written, Dirty Little Secrets.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Now, I was going to sing a song about drone warfare that I wrote a while back, which I sent to the folks here recently. And yesterday I got home and I think this needs to be taken back a bit. Yesterday was the 100th birthday of Woody Guthrie. And the ghost of Woody Guthrie came to me yesterday and gave me a song. Woody Guthrie had a sticker on his guitar that said, "This machine kills fascists." I was thinking about getting one that had a picture of the richest woman in the world and say, "This machine kills fat shits." Now I want you to help me sing this. The chorus goes, "Your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. We know what you're doing in your dirty little war. It's the same thing you've been doing time and time and time before. Your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore." Let's try that again. Your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. We know what you're doing in your dirty little war. It's the same thing you've been doing time and time and time before. Your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. It's hard to keep a secret in the age of information. One little button pushed and it's out there to every nation. Everybody understands the current situation because Julian Assange is around. And your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. We know what you're doing in your dirty little war. It's the same thing you've been doing time and time and time before. Your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. Now this is my favourite verse. The last line of this verse is my favourite, okay? Now those who want to hide the truth in the killing industry have a vested interest that they hide from you and me. They spend a bloody lot of money on security, but it doesn't work so well now they found. And you're... Flip it. Flip it. We know what you're... Sorry. Well, dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. We know what you're doing in your dirty little war. It's the same thing you've been doing time and time and time before. Your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. Once upon a time, back when I was in my youth, the US Army war machine would cover up the truth. But they can't do that anymore, cause now we've got the proof of the way they throw their weight around. And your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. We know what you're doing in your dirty little war. It's the same thing that they did time and time and time before. Your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. Now we hope that they don't get Assange, but we know they might, but it won't kill the message, and we know that it's right. The truth is out there, and Assange turned on the light. He should not have to live underground. Your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. We know what you're doing in your dirty little war. It's the same thing you've been doing time and time and time before. Your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. Your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. Your dirty little secret ain't a secret anymore. Thank you.
That's it, everyone. We finished for the formal proceedings, but do stay. Sign the petition, sign our mailing list, buy a badge, buy a bag. Support Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. Thanks, everyone, for coming.
No, give it to me. You're under arrest. I'm taking any copy right from you.
Hey, guys!
Come on! Come on!
Hey,
Come on!
get back!
Get back! Come on! I told you, and I've told you 3 times, right? I have issues. You move towards the police officers again. You see me? Right, these police will search it. These police go out and see it. Thanks.
Did you get that?
You got any other property on here? Yeah. Right, stand up. Have you got your ID? Right, stand up. I'll get your ID. Have you got your ID?
So we can't just go over but they can manhandle them. Said several times I don't know. I want receipts to that stuff.
Well, I know, it's a protest, you've left something there. And then, obviously, you rang us and said, right, there's something that we left here. You've all put your hand up just times. That's right, you've all put your hands up.
I'd like to say this is my responsibility. I thought of this, I made these kids just...
Just like I'm talking to you guys, you're not free to leave until the child gets the details. Search it for anything further, make sure that live's free.
There's nothing inside.
Oh, it doesn't matter, whatever the intent is.
Are we actually under arrest though, or are you just detaining us? Just to clarify.
Now you're under arrest now that we have information.
For up the road.
They can't put me under arrest for up the road.
Pretty sure. Said
But he just said I was under arrest for up the road. I'm not a criminal, I'm a protester. I don't fight for my own. Sorry? For 6 people. Weren't shutting any roads down.
The people that burnt the Syrian embassy a few weeks ago, mate, where were you guys? Did they have a right to...
500, like half a million people in Singapore Square put form 1 in.
They never stop. They're the thought police. We're committing thought crime.
We put a polystyrene box on. And apparently I'm under arrest for up the road. According to that dude, that's what's actually under arrest. He wasn't there.
Is that a reason we're on No, you've already been we're speaking with them. Sorry, Sorry. Phone up? Under arrest.
How does the box cause harm to you? Yeah. I'm just trying to clarify. It's got IMF, HSBC, pretty much, yeah. Things that damage the world. It's an active sector. That's what we're to protest what's happening in Greece.
The Greek government has sold out their
Investigate what's happening in Greece. Awesome. That would be far better use of your time. Peaceful protest.
Here Levy riot squad. Constable S. Engel. Roberts riot squad.
Yeah, that's what I'm on off.
Haley, We're being arrested for littering. We didn't even litter. This is called political persecution. Attention everyone, this is political persecution. We are being charged apparently with littering. This is ridiculous. We didn't even litter. This is an attempt to shut down a peaceful protest. These people are grasping at straws and making a massive fool of themselves. Who knows how long they'll falsely imprison us for this time? I call on the police to stop wasting police resources on trying to persecute a political protest. There are actual crimes being committed and people are being arrested for thinking. It's a waste of millions of dollars of your taxes.
Yeah, it's 0424 153.
It's going to say from June 2003.
Let him know.
City Central.
Extradition we weren't allowed!
Extradition we weren't allowed!
Julia Gillard will respond!
Julia Gillard will respond!
Assange's life is on the line!
Assange's life is on the line!
Extradition we weren't allowed!
Extradition we weren't allowed!
Bring Assange home now!
Of course, he might be sent straight on from Sweden to the United States, thanks to the temporary surrender arrangement between those two countries. And in the United States, he will be prosecuted on trumped-up grand jury charges by a government that is intent on punishing him, just like they have punished alleged WikiLeaks whistleblower Bradley Manning. Shame, exactly. And you know what? We say that's wrong and we will not stand for it. Julian Assange is a courageous journalist. WikiLeaks was founded with one aim: justice through transparency. And through Cablegate, the Iraq war logs, the Afghan war diaries, WikiLeaks has helped tip the balance of power from the 1% to the 99%. And apparently our governments don't like that one bit. The United States government starts wars in the name of freedom and democracy. But when their authority is actually challenged, they look more and more like a totalitarian regime. When the Cablegate releases began, they tried to shut down WikiLeaks. They called Julian Assange a terrorist. They called for him to be assassinated, hunted down, garroted in his hotel room, etc., etc. And our government's response? Our Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, instantly labelled him a criminal. They've dismissed his complaints about the death threats as part of a media campaign to avoid extradition to the US. That is a scandal. And our Attorney General, Nicola Roxon, well, she has said today that Australia will not intervene in an extradition between the US and the UK or the US and Sweden. She merely claimed that she had sought assurances from the US that they would apply all the proper processes to Assange. The point is, no US processes should be applied to him. He is a journalist. And as for Bob Carr, before he became Foreign Minister, he wrote on his blog that certain aspects of the Swedish justice system applying to Assange, such as the fact that he would be tried in secret, are an outrage by Australian standards. And he's done nothing to defend Assange either.
Shame, Bob Carr, shame!
Well, I say, Gillard, Roxon, Carr, you are an outrage. You're an outrage by our standards. This is supposed to be a democracy. You're supposed to represent us, not your friends in Washington. It is your duty to protect Australians when they are threatened overseas.
Exactly.
But as Christine Assange has observed,
Trying to get on.
the reaction of power has exposed them more than the cables, and our government has been exposed as gutless, untrustworthy and self-serving. So it's up to us, and that's why I'm so glad to see you all here today. It's up to us to defend Julian Assange and defend our democracy.
Free Julian Assange!
Our first speaker today is David Shoebridge, who is a Greens member for the New South Wales Upper House. David is a tireless advocate for free speech and civil liberties in our state, and he's currently campaigning for a Bill of Rights here. David.
Thanks, Linda. Thanks to you all for coming out tonight. I'd like to first of all pay my respects to the traditional owners of this land we're meeting on today, land of the Gadigal people. Sovereignty's never been ceded over this land. But I'd also like to thank the Stop the War Coalition and all those other groups who've come out here today and have people on the streets of Sydney doing what our government, what our Foreign Minister and what our Prime Minister have failed to do, which is speak up for the rights of Julian Assange as an Australian citizen to protection by our government, because he's not getting it and we're demanding that today. Julian Assange and Bradley Manning sit together as probably the two most dangerous people on the planet for our government and the United States government. And what has been the response from those governments? Well, our government has been silent, but the United States government has been actively persecuting Bradley Manning. And when the direct question is asked of Bob Carr, has there been any action taken by the United States to either secretly or otherwise extradite Julian Assange from the United Kingdom or Sweden? The answer from the Foreign Affairs Minister is the Australian government has no evidence of that. Well, when Senator Scott Ludlam asked Senator Bob Carr, what has the Australian government done about inquiring whether or not there's a secret extradition or some other extradition of Julian Assange, he was met by stonewalling and silence from our Foreign Affairs Minister. This is an Australian citizen, and that is not good enough from our government. Because what is the crime that Julian Assange is really on trial for by the United States? What is the crime that Bradley Manning is on trial for by the United States? Julian Assange's crime is telling the truth, speaking truth to power, and for once showing people around this globe the real human face of a war that's been fought on our television cameras, on the internet. He is telling us the truth of war and the ugly, brutal face of a war that is effectively being carried out like it's a video game. But people around the globe are dying, and that's what he's being committed to trial for. WikiLeaks is a new venture in terms of global information on this planet. Never before have people been able to see so directly what our governments are doing. Never before have people been able to have exposed to them on a global scale the truth about the American military regime. Never before have we been able to look on our computer screens and see things like turkey shoots happening, where real people are being killed by the machinery paid for by our taxes. Well, WikiLeaks enables us to all stand up and say, this crime is not being committed in our name. This crime being undertaken by our governments, whether it's a war in Afghanistan or a war in Iraq, this crime is not being committed in our name. We need to be on the streets here today to speak up for Julian Assange because our government is failing its citizens. We will not rest, we will continue to come here. There's a gathering here today in Sydney. It's being matched by one in Melbourne, by one in Brisbane, by one in Perth, by one in Townsville, because people across Australia are calling on our government to stand up for Julian Assange, stand up for freedom of speech, and stand up to the United States. Thank you all for coming.
And we're very pleased to have here today as our next speaker, David Hicks.
Maybe he should use the megaphone. You can't hear down the back.
I'll try and speak a bit louder. So, a journalist detained and tortured. A practice not uncommon in news headlines. A claim usually made against dictatorships. Unfortunately, however, I am talking about a very possible near future scenario involving the governments of Australia and the US. And as we know, this will not be the first time that they have been connected to torture. Governments who promote themselves as nations that as a matter of principle and law enjoy freedom of expression, speech and the press. Julian Assange is a journalist, a brave and selfless journalist who is not afraid to publish information for our benefit, though there should be nothing to be afraid of. Julian has done nothing more than act in the spirit of freedom of speech, freedom of the press, truth and transparency in his professional capacity as a journalist. Exactly what's expected from our journalists. And yet, he has become a political prisoner. Our media is of poor quality already, and what is being done to Julian with the acknowledgement of our government will only ensure this continues for the message it sends to all other journalists, including the journalists here. Publish what we don't want you to, and we'll destroy your life. Julian will be extradited to the US. It's not a matter of if, but when. The Australian government has proven by past and current examples that what they have to say on the matter is meaningless. They lack credibility. I've had first-hand experience of what it is like to be an Australian citizen and a political prisoner of the US. Australian consular assistance did not protect me from treatment that amounted to torture.
Shame!
Instead, they allowed it to happen, and they seem to be giving all indications that history is about to repeat itself. Such involvement of itself amounts to complicity. The Australian government is once again sacrificing and devaluing Australian citizenship, only to appease a foreign power. Julian Assange is part of a long line of Australian citizens neglected, if not harmed, by their own government while abroad. Embarrassing at the least for Australia, and at times illegal at its worst. It appears Australian citizenship is worthless in the view of the Australian government, that is Liberal and Labor. Up till now, the Australian government has been able to intervene on his behalf, and yet they have not, and they are able to intervene in the future, but based on past experience, they won't. Among other things, for example, they should be securing assurances that Julian won't be mistreated while in US custody. Instead, they just deny that he'll even go there. We need to demand of our leaders freedom of speech, including freedom of press, where incentives and awards are given to those such as Julian, not punishments. We want a dynamic and independent media who can operate without fear of reprisals, something that we currently lack. We want freedom from politically motivated detentions, freedom from physical and psychological torture. Our leaders need to take more pride in being Australian, to safeguard its citizens abroad and give peace of mind to those who carry Australian passports overseas, and to have the courage to say no to foreign countries who treat us as second-class citizens and wish us harm. Julian must be brought home before it is too late. My experience is a good prediction as to what awaits Julian. I cannot understand why we, especially our government, have still not learnt from the past. I hope, and I truly hope, that Julian is prepared for conditions that will amount to torture, because that is what awaits him once he ends up in US hands.
Thank you so much, David Hicks. Okay, so we've got lots of great speakers lined up for you today, and our next speaker is Simon Frew, Deputy President of the Pirate Party Australia. As a lot of you know, the Pirate Party campaigns for freedom of information and culture, civil and digital liberties, and government transparency. Simon.
Thank you. Julian Assange first became a household name with the release of the Collateral Murder video, where journalists in Iraq were gunned down by a helicopter gunship. This was followed by Afghan war diaries and Cablegate. Through these leaks, allegedly leaked by Bradley Manning, WikiLeaks became easily the most important news organisation on the planet. This is due to a lack of competition from the mainstream media, who increasingly cozy up to their political and corporate masters. The war in Afghanistan is a prime example. Journalists mostly get in bed with their national military and stick to the agenda outlined in various press conferences held to give out the company line. Whilst there are some brave journalists who don't play that game, the majority are content to bask in the glow of the powerful, whilst publishing what is expected by their corporate masters. This is why WikiLeaks is so important. Its agenda is purely to provide mechanism for transparency, a way for citizens of the world to see what is done in our names. To paraphrase Julian, only through accurate access to information can people make rational decisions about how they wish to live their own lives. The widespread condemnation of the leaks and the demonisation and persecution of Assange demonstrates that Western governments, including the Gillard government, are colluding to protect the interests of the US war machine and its profiteers. Like cockroaches scurrying away from the light, the US has launched an unprecedented assault on whistleblowers, with many figures of the US political establishment calling for the assassination of Assange for being a high-tech terrorist, and harsher penalties are being passed for people found guilty of leaking information. Obama, after promising to protect whistleblowers, has now become very aggressive in punishing people who blow the whistle on corrupt conduct in the USA. Credit card giants Visa and MasterCard, as well as PayPal, put in place the WikiLeaks financial blockade at the behest of members of the US Congress. No doubt aware of the implications of increased transparency for corrupt banking institutions, they undertook to cut off funds without any legal basis. The website was also temporarily lost hosting, which was quickly resupplied by the Pirate Party of Switzerland and mirrored by literally hundreds of organisations and individuals around the world. This is where accusations of sexual assault first surfaced in Sweden. I don't want to speculate about the claims of the women involved, but what is clear is that Julian Assange has not been charged with a thing. He's been held in detention for over 500 days for mere questioning. It is unacceptable that someone can be deprived of their freedom without charge. It is unacceptable that he can be extradited just to be questioned. Basic legal principles have been ignored in the frenzy to get Assange for causing the USA embarrassment. Not just in Sweden, but the USA, Australia and Britain are all guilty. WikiLeaks is constantly ridiculed by various hacks and shills working in the mainstream media. Julian Assange is described as a megalomaniac, as arrogant, even his dirty socks are used against him in an attempt to smear him. This is because WikiLeaks is showing them how to do their job. It's part of a new media, a media based on participation, a media that holds the powerful to account, the social media. The old media lets down the very people it's meant to inform time and again. During the much-hyped leadership challenge between Rudd and Gillard, the government passed the new law streamlining extradition procedures, i.e. making it easier for foreign countries to demand your extradition if you're suspected of a crime. There was no mention in the media, as most journalists were focused on the drama of the Machiavellian power struggle they'd been cheering on for months. It got passed quietly with little opposition or even comment, and nothing much was said about it in the media. We have seen the dangers of loosening extradition laws in the UK, where 23-year-old Richard O'Dwyer, owner of file-sharing site TV Shack, has been remanded for extradition to the USA, a country he has never visited, for hosting links to pirated material, an activity that is not illegal in the UK. It is suspected that Australian law was passed to make sure it was easier to extradite Julian Assange should he ever come home. but it is also a threat to the freedom of us all. With silence on important issues like these from the old media, it's up to all of us to be the media. We have to keep each other informed. We have to speak out about injustices we see. We have to be like Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, or the silence will become deafening.
Speak up!
According to the strap full of documents WikiLeaks published, the US's charges already waiting for Julian once his European legal hurdles are cleared. Julian Assange is not a US citizen. He should not be tried there, nor has he broken any Australian laws. He should not be subject to laws of the US just because he made them look bad. Under the new Australian extradition laws, we all face the risk of being extradited to countries we have never visited for activities that aren't illegal here. During the US Revolution, the Continental Forces famously said no taxation without representation. They understood that being subjected to the laws of a government without being able to participate in that government is fundamentally unjust. They should understand that we must resist any attempt for Australian citizens to be tried under American law. We can't elect them, therefore not be beholden to their laws. This is a sign of democracy under assault. It is up to each and every one of us to stand up for justice, for democracy and for freedom. It is up to all of us to work together to defend Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. Western governments are increasingly banding together to take away the rights of our citizens. We need to band together to fight back. We need to stand up. We need to stand up for each other and fight back against the erosion of civil liberties and against governments to serve the interests of a corporate elite against their own populations. This is not a struggle that can be left to professional politicians or activists. This is a fight for our freedom, of our way of life. Julian Assange is a metaphorical canary down the mine shaft. What they try to do to him is just a precursor to what can happen to any one of us who stands up for democracy, who stands up for equality and who stands up for freedom. We must stand up now while we still can. Thank you.
Before I speak myself, Austin McKell, who's an Australian journalist many of you will have heard of, who's currently almost trapped in Cairo, sent a statement this afternoon that he wanted to be read, and I'll read this. It's a very short 3 paragraphs. I would like to start by saying, this is Austin, not me. I would like to start by saying how honoured I was when asked to write this letter. I must also take this opportunity to thank Mr. Assange for the time he has taken to raise attention regarding my case. Someone of his profile finding time to speak about my situation would be worthy of thanks in any case. Given the far more serious persecution he is facing, it shows a remarkable sense of solidarity and concern for others. The situation is stark. The possibility of Assange's extradition is very real and very imminent. We know that Sweden has participated in the US program of extraordinary rendition, allowing 2 men, Egyptian citizens, to be kidnapped by American operatives and taken to Egypt for torture. We know that the Australian government cannot be trusted to stand up to America and protect its citizens from such treatment, as was so amply demonstrated by the cases of David Hicks, who you just heard, and Mamdouh Habib, and is demonstrated now by their ongoing failure to act on behalf of Assange. The Swedes say that the only reason for the extradition is so that Assange can be questioned regarding charges relating to the personal contact within Sweden, not because of his work with WikiLeaks. If this is really the case, then why don't they first guarantee he will not be taken from Sweden to US custody? Why doesn't our government demand this of them? The answers to these questions are painfully obvious. Once more, our government is set to sell out the rights of an Australian citizen at the request of Imperial HQ in Washington. We can't let them get away with it. That was Austin. Now me. I just want to speak very briefly because a lot of speakers, my message really is one about courage and saying that what's happening in the moment with Assange, he's been under house arrest for over 500 days, has not been charged with anything, nothing. This is a very important point. So when we talk in Australia about courage and bravery and standing up for those who actually make a difference, in my lifetime, and I'm a young pup of 30s somewhere, there are very few people from my country that I would say I can be as proud of as Julian Assange. In the space of 6 years, he has released more documents on WikiLeaks than the entire corporate media combined in the last 30. That's his words, not mine. And at the moment, as many will be aware, Fairfax staff are on strike in Sydney and Melbourne and elsewhere in New South Wales and Victoria, for the very reason that they say that important media actually matters. Whatever we think about Fairfax, we all have our issues and concerns about them. The fact of the matter is, they're an alternative to the Murdoch press, and for that reason, they should be supported as well. Just finally, as a journalist and an independent journalist in Australia, what I would say about Julian Assange is, both in his supposed crimes or lack thereof, we should stand up and support him, and more importantly, demand that the Australian government under Julia Gillard, and a weird irony this morning, it's a strange, fucked up world when Julia Bishop, the Deputy Foreign Minister, should I say the Opposition Foreign Minister, says exactly what needs to be said, which is Julia Gillard accused Assange of a crime. He's committed no crime. That by definition prejudices his case anywhere. And when, as David Shoebridge said, when Bob Carr was asked in Senate estimates yesterday what was actually going to happen if the US asked for extradition, Bob Carr said nothing had been received. What I think needs to be said is nothing has been received he wants to acknowledge. He must defend someone like him and demand our government stands up for him. Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Professor Stuart Rees of the Sydney Peace Foundation. The Sydney Peace Foundation, of course, awarded Julian Assange the gold medal in 2011 in recognition of Assange's exceptional courage and initiative in the pursuit of human rights. Stuart Rees.
First of all, congratulations to you all for being here. What we're protesting about is centuries and centuries of the notion that secrecy is a key feature of government. And the significant achievements of WikiLeaks, of Bradley Manning and Julian Assange is to challenge that notion. All sorts of key courageous figures of the kind referred to by Anthony a few minutes ago, such as the political satirist Daniel Defoe, such as Tom Paine, the author of The Rights of Man, such as Daniel Ellsberg of the Pentagon Papers, such as Bradley Manning, such as Julian Assange, have been challenged because, have been prosecuted because they challenged this notion that secrecy was a form of government. Secrecy based on the assumption that you don't really need to know, that you are not sufficiently sophisticated to understand. So let's bear that in mind. We are trying to, as we stagger through this first part of the 21st century, we want to challenge the notion that more and more secrecy, more and more mean resources for the great God, security, is not what we want in a so-called open democracy. The second thing I want to say, and in some ways I am echoing what's already been said by other speakers, let's be very careful in listening to what the American public, or rather the American political and military culture is saying. The very respectable American ambassador to Australia, Jeffrey something or other, Jeffrey Vice, a close friend of the president, said yesterday that America, his government, has no particular interest in Assange. And yet if you switch back for just a few months and listen to what major political and media leaders in America have said, you'd know that Jeffrey is being fooled, or he's not listening, or he doesn't want to tell us the truth. A major contender for the presidency said that capital punishment wouldn't be good enough for Assange. Similar comments were made by the anchorman on Fox News. He said, I know it's illegal to encourage people of America to go out and use guns on the streets, but if any of you have a gun, I would advise you to get hold of it and shoot the son of a bitch. Now, in response to that, to those demands from leading Americans, and if that's not good enough, listen to the amazing Sarah Palin, who said that Assange should be hunted down like bin Laden. In response to that, the unfortunate pack of cowards, not all of them, but most of them, in that privileged the corral in Canberra, said nothing, except to say that Assange had probably committed an offence, and that in the case of the former Attorney General, we ought to consider taking his passport away from him. There was a deafening silence. So Anthony's reference to please let's find the quality of courage in public life out of respect for the courage that Assange and Bradley Manning have shown, is a very important demand to make, because unfortunately the cowardice, the subterfuge, the use of figures of speech to conceal what they really mean is part of the absurd culture that goes on in Canberra, and that really makes us feel that we are unfortunately likely yet again to do the Americans' bidding. Final thing, and large audiences at night after they've heard several speakers always want to hear a speaker say, "and the final thing." Julia Gillard has said several times, I don't get it. I don't get why you are concerned about WikiLeaks. Why are you concerned about freedom of speech? Why are you concerned about Julian Assange? I don't really get it. All of the people here get it. It's about justice. It's actually about not holding Manning and Assange accountable, but holding accountable the people who think that the violent use of force, think only of the collateral damage video, is a way to run a country, is the way to run policies. They're the people who should be held accountable. And this crowd is here to say, Julia Gillard, listen to us because we get it, and the people surrounding you apparently do not. Free Julian Assange.
The Australian government's act immediately to secure Julian Assange's release. Julian's role in spearheading the enormously important window to the truth, WikiLeaks, is obvious to all. Also obvious are the reasons why the Australian government has an interest in trying to silence WikiLeaks. And not standing up for Julian is one way of attempting to do that. As other speakers have said tonight, the information that WikiLeaks has shared with the world is information we have a right to know. It is information that the government doesn't want us to know. And for that reason, it's even more important that we do know it. The publication of WikiLeaks, by WikiLeaks, of the Iraq and Afghan war logs and diaries has given everyone, and in particular the anti-war movement, a powerful tool against these criminal and increasingly unpopular imperialist wars. For some people, the exposure of the details of the planning and the actioning of two of the most grotesque war crimes in recent history vindicated our trenchant opposition to these wars. For others, it was a window into the real intent of Western powers and drove home the terrible consequences of taking Western leaders' double-speak on face value. The Supreme Court's ruling on Julian Assange's appeal comes just as Western leaders are openly canvassing invading yet another country, Syria. Military intervention in Syria is being threatened once again following the massacre in Hula, even while it isn't clear exactly who carried out this horrendous massacre. We should not allow sympathy for the victims of this massacre to become the pretext for Western military intervention in Syria. That has been done before, and with disastrous results. Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya. These brutal wars, all justified as humanitarian and to restore democracy, have only led to greater numbers of people being killed. And this is where WikiLeaks has done such a powerful service. In a world increasingly mired in Orwellian double-speak from the 1%, WikiLeaks plays an invaluable role in shining the light on what that 1% really think. I don't know if any of you saw I'm sure you did, the huge anti-war protests against NATO in Chicago a week or so ago. But in particular, the moving protest by the Iraq and the Afghanistan war veterans. The people that are fed up with being used as cannon fodder. It was a powerful reminder that people do not forget. These veterans lined up to throw their medals away, a symbolic rejection of the so-called war on terror. One of these, Scott Olson, a former vet and an Occupy supporter and protester, said, "These medals once made me feel good. Then I came back to reality and I don't want them anymore." Well, I think WikiLeaks publication of the war logs has had a lot to do with this. We should use this moment to recommit ourselves to the struggle to defend WikiLeaks and Julian Assange and that other brave individual, Bradley Manning. The Australian government must break from its sorry past, its refusal to assist its citizens that the US has a special interest in persecuting, namely David Hicks and Mamdouh Habib. It must speak up for Julian Assange and demand his release from custody immediately. Blowing the whistle on war crimes is not a crime. Free Julian Assange, defend WikiLeaks.
And I'd like to say that I'm in fantastic company here tonight. I would like to acknowledge David Hicks. Thank you, David, for your words and your incredible bravery being here tonight. I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on Aboriginal land, on Gadigal land, land that was never ceded, never sold, never given away. I pay my respects to the elders past and present. This is Aboriginal land, always was and always will be. I'd also like to acknowledge the spineless Australian government's lack of support for the safety of one of its own citizens. Our government officials smugly say that Assange will receive the same help any citizen gets from our embassy. But we know from the cases of David Hicks and Mamdouh Habib that that help is non-existent. I had hoped that today this would be an occasion for celebration, rather than the fateful decision that was handed down by London Supreme Court yesterday. It is with a heavy heart that we now have to rally with fear for the continuing safety of Julian Assange. What we have seen here is more than the isolation and persecution of one man, of Julian Assange. It is the effective crushing of the ideals that are pertained in WikiLeaks. We have seen the ruling elites of the world act together to silence the one voice that dared to expose the secret workings of their governments. This is particularly true of the United States of America, where critics of Assange and WikiLeaks have called for the assassination of Julian, providing that all the documents he released which shows that all the documents he released were a true reflection of the brutality of that particular regime. The hysterical response from America has led to the many fears that Julian Assange could be rendered to the United States, where he will vanish into the same limbo that contains Bradley Manning. If there was one event more than any other that defined the war in Iraq, it was that release of footage that showed the helicopter that killed that Iraqi journalist, his cameraman, and the civilians that surrounded him.
Murder!
This piece of film shocked the world and highlighted the horrors of war and the desensitisation that marked the US military's treatment of Iraqi civilians. Like the photos of the atrocities at Abu Ghraib, that film, released by WikiLeaks, had the effect of shocking regular people's belief in the justice of America's military role in Iraq. We need the disclosures of WikiLeaks to enlighten the world to the devious machinations of governments and their minions. How regular were the releases of secret military and diplomatic documents that we came to expect from WikiLeaks, and how barren is the infosphere now that the world's banks and the 1% have effectively closed down WikiLeaks. It has been a cautionary tale to watch the rise and fall of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. It has shown the way that not one government has stood behind truth-telling and transparency. Not one government has had the courage or the innocence to stand for exposure. Instead, they have all shown their potential guilt and secretiveness.
The price of truth-telling has been very high for Assange and for WikiLeaks, and the costs are still being paid with this dodgy extradition ruling and the fears that surround it. Extraditing Assange to Sweden for questioning is an extreme and secretive action in itself. Under Swedish law, Assange could be held incommunicado while he is questioned over an issue that is so murky it is hard to believe they are seriously carrying out such extreme actions. It is highly unusual for anyone to be extradited for questioning over an issue as flimsy and vague as this, and it was with great trepidation that we await Julian's fate over the next few weeks. Australia must stand up and protect this courageous Australian who appears to be in great danger of phony justice, secret deals, possible rendition and international revenge. I would now like to read a message from Australian Greens Senator Scott Ludlam. It's only short. Bring Julian home. Around the country today we're coming together to demand action from the Australian government to protect an Australian citizen from prosecution and from persecution. Yesterday's verdict in the UK Supreme Court provides for another delay, another fortnight of legal limbo. It is another 2 weeks in which the important work of this publishing organisation stays on hold. We're calling for Julian Assange to come home. The WikiLeaks publishing organisation has been targeted with sustained harassment and character assassination, and its finances have been shattered by a banking blockade by Visa, MasterCard, PayPal and others. In Australia, we have seen bipartisan political indifference on behalf of the old parties. Indifference that looks on closer examination like hostility. The Australian citizens need diplomatic, legal and political help from his government, and he's not getting it. Today we've come together to demand his safe return to Australia, and more importantly, to meet each other in person to organise and plan the next stages of this campaign. We need to raise our voices much louder in direct challenge to the economic and political interests that seem to feel so threatened by uncompromising transparency. Thanks for turning out today in defence of democracy, in defence of the freedom to communicate, and in defence of the people who now find themselves under attack for leading the way. Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange!
The award-winning investigative journalist Wendy Beacon. Wendy's also an academic, professor of journalism at UTS, and a long-time social justice advocate.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you very much. And can I say it's a privilege to be asked to speak tonight at this rally, which is just one of many rallies happening all around the world. And it's critically important that even though there are so many issues going on at the same time, like rivers bubbling with coal seam gas, journalists getting sacked, many other issues, that we keep our focus on this issue and keep protesting, because we can be absolutely sure that the pressure on WikiLeaks, the ideas it stands for, and on Julian Assange will continue and continue from, as Irene has so eloquently said, from every government really around the world, but most particularly those in the US alliance, of which of course we are such a small but absolutely obedient part. Which is why when I heard the US ambassador this morning being quoted as saying that the US government wouldn't have the slightest interest in extraditing Julian Assange, I knew that it had absolutely no relevance. The fact that the Australian government won't release under FOI some important information that's needed to know what the situation is just means he is a complete irrelevancy. Now what I thought I would do fairly briefly is just, sorry, I've got my notes on my mobile phone, which has somehow gone off the screen. Yes, what I thought I would do just briefly is go back to a year or so ago when many of us were rallying, and I know a lot of you have since, and when I spoke the last time, I went back and looked at my notes, and what I remembered is the huge welling up of public sympathy for Julian Assange in the early days of this campaign. And then what we saw at the beginning of 2011, an insidious but unfortunately only too typical attack to try to divert people from what the real issues are. So I thought I'd go through a few of the arguments that have been put to me and say how, what I actually feel about those arguments. Now, the first thing that was raised, that when people were talking about how he would have a defence in the United States to publishing, it was that he wasn't a journalist. Now, some, like the New York Times and others, led the pack on that one, and that was very disappointing. And it's a greatly encouraging, I think, that on this issue, the MEAA, which is our journalists' union, really stood up and gave Julian Assange an award for his work and contribution to Australian and other journalism, and I thought that was very welcome. So, first of all, he is a journalist. Then we got a whole lot of stories and in-depth pieces on Julian Assange's personality. And so many times now I've had people say to me, oh, I hear he's not a very nice person, I hear he's eccentric, I hear he's that, and quite frankly, I couldn't care less. And in fact, I haven't met Julian Assange. I'd like to meet him, and I actually think I would find him to be quite an interesting person. But nevertheless, it is irrelevant, and I'm sure it is to all of you too. We're not here to idealise a personality, we're here to stick to the issues. And all this character assassination of him is really part of just a simple diversion campaign. The next thing, of course, or another thing that was said, is that somehow, somewhere, somebody could have been damaged by the publication of the cables. Well, for a start, a huge amount more benefit by shining a light on the way that the US government deals with its embassies around the world. Huge amount more benefit was gained from the publication of those cables. Just the video of the murder in Iraq alone, the collateral damage video, would have done a huge amount more benefit. But anyway, that's the sort of argument that you can never answer. You can never definitively prove that there is not an effect of a particular kind. However, what you can say is that those cables, before they were ever published, were published to hundreds of thousands of people, internal people. So if anyone cared about the safety of anyone, those people were in fact responsible. So these are just some of the arguments that have been put along the way. And I think what's been really impressive is that people have rejected those, and the campaign has built, just looking at the various actions that are taking place in London, will take place in the United States. Now there's two last arguments I want to mention. One is that, and Janet Albrechtsen said this to me at a forum where I was speaking with her about WikiLeaks, and she said, oh, none of you people care about Bradley Manning. Well, that is just a pile of rot as well. And again, just a way of saying don't talk about Julian Assange. I'm sure all the people here are the same people who are protesting about Bradley Manning and have been from day one. And it's absolutely appalling what has happened to Bradley Manning and the way he's been treated. But to suggest that because that's happening to Bradley Manning, it should happen, or we shouldn't care about the fact it would happen to other people too, in this case Julian Assange, is of course again another irrelevancy. Another argument I've had put to me is that somehow I don't care about women and attacks on women because I'm supporting Julian Assange. Well, of course I believe that of the rights of women to complain about sexual assault. I don't know all about the laws in Sweden, but I'm prepared to believe, because in some ways Sweden is a progressive society and the whole of Scandinavia does a lot better on many issues than we do, I'm prepared to believe there are some things about their system that are good. But I have read enough on this case to know that there are deep flaws in this prosecution. The whole method of prosecution and judgment is a matter that is debated not only throughout Europe and in this case, but in many other cases and within Swedish society. But of course that's not on that we don't actually hear about that so much. But it's very controversial in Sweden what is happening in this case and what is happening to Julian Assange. So I guess they're the arguments that I think, constantly come our way and we have to dispel. So just putting it really simply, like all of you, I'm here because I believe in the transparency of information. I believe that a lot of things about the way our government relates to the United States, the wars we've gone to on behalf of the United States and on our own behalf, are disgraceful wars that have caused untold loss of life and damage to people. And we were lied to about those wars. And what WikiLeaks did was first of all launch a whole new way of doing journalism and getting information, and secondly it actually provided more information from which we can counter those actions done on our behalf which we're so opposed to. And of course I'm very concerned about what's happening to Julian Assange, and it said to us, you can't prove he's going to be extradited to the United States. You can't prove he's going to be held incommunicado in Sweden. Well, of course I can't prove it, and nor can you. But you only need to look at the record of governments. Do you know during the NATO protests, 35,000 people were arrested on one day throughout the United States, and we didn't hear about it. This is a government, the United States, that does things in secret, that holds people for years on end without trial in appalling conditions. I don't care what they say. I would not like anyone to run the risk, particularly a person in the situation of Julian Assange, of ending up in their hands. So like you, I will continue to protest, and I hope that Julian Assange is freed and that WikiLeaks most of all can get on with the job that it was set up to do.
I'm here because I'm supporting the No West Connects campaign. It impacts on the whole of the inner west, in fact on the whole of Sydney.
West Connects is going to cost $14 billion.
What we need to be doing is cancelling the No West Connects completely and making that investment instead in public transport, which we can achieve much better outcomes at a fraction of the cost.
If you go to Blacktown Hospital Casualty, you can wait up to 24 hours. If you go to RPA, I've waited 12 hours there. The hospitals are starved of funds, and they're going to be continuing to be starved of funds because $14 billion is going to use up all the money that the state has.
The West Connects doesn't stack up on any grounds, not economic grounds, not environmental grounds, not social grounds, and not transport grounds.
Today, this is the future. We're going to stop West Connects. Thanks for coming, everybody.
We're here today because we're in particular drawing attention to the latest announcement from the government that St Peter's is where they want to put an interchange as a sort of portal to the West Connects project. It's going to mean at the very least 40 houses going.
People have already been sent letters saying they have to vacate their homes in 12 months. I mean, what a horrendous demand.
And these are people who had no idea this was on the agenda.
Stop West Connects! Stop West Connects!
Look, my objection to West Connects is simply that when you get a private company doing what should be the job of government to provide services and infrastructure, then there are other imperatives and incentives that come and take over that.
We live in the 21st century where we need to build public transport based on light rail, on heavy rail, on integrated cycling and walking connections. But most of all, the government is arrogantly pushing ahead with the West Connects without a business case, without an environmental impact assessment.
No business case has yet been put to the public about West Connects.
Not tolls! Stop West Connects!
And no environmental impact statement has yet been released. So how is it possible that people's very houses can be acquired before you have an environmental impact statement? That's why we're here today.
Public transport is the only answer. No, we won't pay for West Connects. No, West Connects!
We've got to put an end to this $15 billion
freeway madness and force this government to actually abandon this crazy project and put serious money into investing in public transport.
We've been fighting this in Parliament for a year and a half, and we'll be standing with our communities, fighting it at this election and beyond.
How can it be stopped? Well, it can be stopped by public action.